All right, we are back on the live stream here with Ross Simmonds and Tim Kachuriak. We're just talking about Texas and belt buckles. Keep going.
Well, I mean,
this is what the people want to hear.
Can I just comment first about, like, I mean, there's like stilt walkers walking around. I mean, we've successfully turned this opera house into a carnival.
A carnival house, yeah.
It's pretty awesome.
It's pretty wild, to be honest.
I mean, you go to a lot of conferences.
I've never seen anything like this.
It's a little,
this is next level.
It's a little nuts.
Yeah, it is nuts. And the Cirque du Soleil act at the beginning was amazing.
Yeah.
No, I've loved it. It's been cool.
Cool. So, Ross, first question for you. How awesome is Canada?
Canada's the best place in the world. We have very chill immigration laws. If anybody wants to come, we are always looking to increase our population.
Yeah.
So please join us. Our winters aren't fun, but yeah.
So I'm Canadian, born and raised myself. And there's actually a decent crew.
But you left us.
No, I'm still there. I'm in Vancouver.
Okay,
for
gotcha.
now.
Cool.
For now. And where are you living nowadays?
I'm in Nova Scotia, so on the East Coast.
Total opposite end.
Total
so
opposite.
last night at the Denver Zoo, someone was asking me, what time is it in Canada? I was like, well, it's the second largest country in the world, so like what part of Canada are you talking about?
That's awesome.
And they were like, you're in Vancouver? Oh, you should just go to Nova Scotia. Like, yeah, it's like an 8-hour flight. Like, cool. I'll just hop over,
It's true.
But speaking of large places, you're down in Texas.
That's it, man. God's country.
That's where we're based?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Based in Dallas. Been there for 12 years now, originally from Pittsburgh. So when I first moved there, I planted a Pittsburgh Steeler flag in my front yard. Because you can take the man out of Pittsburgh, can't take the Pittsburgh out of the man.
There you go.
So
as a Philly fan,
oh boy,
I do not like that.
Look at this.
But it is what it is.
Yeah. So question to you, Tim. What was it like performing with a circus troupe?
It was absolutely insane.
Really?
Like, I mean, I just keep checking things off my bucket list. Like each summit year. I mean, next year, Willy Wonka? Really? I mean, come on.
Spoiler alert, but.
Yeah.
So are you going to have a chocolate river or something?
Oh, there's going to be chocolate rivers,
yeah.
Oompa Loompas. It's going to be the whole nine.
It's going to be nuts. It's going to be nuts. So what was neat about both of your guys' presentation, and this is what's cool about seeing how different topics work together, right? And especially talking about content, one thing that we've seen in fundraising is like if you just ask people to give without delivering some type of value, they're not as likely to give. So we need content, and how do we actually produce content? So do you want to share a little bit more about some of what we've seen about the value of content? And then I want to ask more specifically, you talked a lot about a lot of strategies and channels, how to maybe narrow in a little bit. So one, just expand on how content can actually help get people to care.
Well, yeah, I mean, first thing you have to understand, Ross, is that nonprofits, we're generally a little bit behind when it comes to like the modern ways of approaching marketing and technology. And so, really just helping people to understand that they do have tremendous amounts of content. So, some organizations may like have people that go around and like do speaking at different events. We're like, record those things, transcribe them, turn them into like ebooks or something, right? Yeah. So I think that the big thing is we're just trying to help people understand that there's so much more content that is flowing through their organization, and to start catching it, repackaging it, repurposing it, and turning it into things that represent value to their potential donors.
I love that. I always say remix is the way to go. Like, people overestimate this idea that you always have to start from scratch, but like all of these organizations have probably decades of content that can be reused. And if you're a 100-year-old company, guess what? That's a good thing, because it means every Throwback Thursday you have content that you can use. Like, it's a simple model, but I love that.
So one of the questions we got, which was actually going to be the question I was going to ask for you, so they're saying, if you want to start distributing content, so I think maybe a lot of people are maybe, okay, we do have some content, but of all these different channels beyond Google, like, where do we even start?
Yeah.
Like, where's the starting point?
I think the starting point is always where your people are right now. Right. A lot of these organizations have groups that exist probably on Facebook where their people are spending time. They might not be directly associated from an official lens with their nonprofit, but they are there. And that's where you need to go. You go into those communities and you amplify their voice. You empower them, you support them, and you inject your story there as well.
Yeah. And one of the challenges I know that happens a lot of times with marketers is people go, I don't like Facebook. I'm not on Facebook. So then they don't think about Facebook or whatever it might be. But to your point, like, it doesn't really matter like what you like.
No,
personally.
it doesn't.
You need to discover where your donors are. So if someone doesn't really know that, how can they do more of that discovery? I mean, you talked about it, but how do you go a little bit
I think one of the easiest ways is to talk to people who donate to you, right? Like, everybody has that donor list.
Idea.
I know it's not novel, marketing 101, but talk to them. Like, talk to the people who are your most significant or long-term gift givers and talk to them about like what channels do you use, and use that to inform your decision. It's very possible that some of the channels I talked about, like Slack, Quora, etc., their people aren't there. But I want every nonprofit, every organization to recognize that the future is like the next wave of gift givers. And those people are using channels that I'm not even on, like TikTok. And we have to be ready. We have to be interested in understanding their world before it's too late.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you, first of all, told our viewers that they should talk to their donors. You heard it here first, folks. Talk to your donors. That's a good plan. But Facebook is a great place to start, and it's very interesting for nonprofits because many nonprofit organizations are funded primarily from boomers, right? And boomers are flooding into Facebook.
I love it.
And they're tremendous consumers of content. People think that boomers don't consume content, that they don't do online transactions, and they actually do more than any other generation. So it's a great opportunity, I think, right now. It's a perfect storm of opportunity.
And they come online to get content. That's part of the reason. They want to learn. They want to consume. It's like a priority for them.
Right. Personal edification is like one of the things that they value more than anything else.
I think I get a like from my mom on every single thing. And she's a boomer, and she loves it, especially when they're retiring, right? Like they have that excess time, and that's where they're spending it. So it's an opportunity for nonprofits to capture that value.
Yeah. So we have another question here. So it's Kelsey from Compassion International. It's a really large organization. She's saying, we have a ton, all caps, ton of content and don't have internal capacity to share it all. So it's a similar type of question. How do we prioritize distribution? So other than find out where your actual key donors actually are, but other than talking to them, or do you have some examples of how they can discover more, or just like tons of content, how do we distribute?
I think it starts with looking at the content and what has the most powerful story, and then doubling down on those ones first. It's easy to think, oh, we have a bunch of content, so let's distribute it all. But you have to figure out what your best content has been. So I'd start there, and then once you've identified it, you don't need to spend all of your resourcing spreading out all of the content. Focus on the content that has the highest ROI and spread that content aggressively.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's another way to prioritize. So instead of focusing on a channel or a medium, it's saying, why don't we actually focus on less content and do a better job of getting that across?
My dad always said it's better to have one good kid than two bad, and the same thing works with content distribution. It's better to be really, really good with one piece of content than mediocre at a bunch of them. So I would push everybody to like find one channel, one piece of content, own it, and then go on to the next one.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
I do.
Oh, so
they're good too.
Okay, that's a very
I know this is live stream, so they're good.
Sorry,
good.
Well, I think it's really important too to make sure that we do research on the front end and understand who our donor is. And you mentioned this about, there's tools that we can use that really give us free data, right? Like Facebook Insights, we can go understand who these people are, what they like. Maybe they don't like Bud Light. That's okay.
That's okay.
But we can use that information to then select what content's going to most resonate with that particular group of people.
Yeah, it always should start with research. Like, it's too easy to get caught up in, I heard somebody speak, so I'm going to do all the things. No, start by understanding where your donors are. Like, boomers probably aren't on Reddit that much yet. So let's chill on Reddit.
Right.
But if your audience is young people and you're running a campaign like Movember, get on Reddit. That's where you need to be. So you have to understand research first and foremost.
Well, and like Tim, you talked about, there's the I care metrics and there's the I don't care metrics, and that relates to content too. So you may love this blog post that you wrote and no one is sharing it and no one's reading it. Well, that's fine that you love it. They're telling you this isn't the type of content that we really enjoy.
Right.
So to your point, don't double down on that. Find out what they actually like.
And I think that's like just the biggest revelation for our time right now is that we have so much behavioral data that we've never had access to.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is we don't have to pretend to know all the answers, as I said. Like, we can actually really let the web be a laboratory for us, right? And test it. And we can test things so cost effectively now and get the answers back so much faster than any other form of research.
Yeah.
And I love primary research. I love getting survey data and understanding like general preferences, but when it comes to preferences versus behavior, I'll take behavior every single day of the week. Yeah.
So we have another question talking about the difference between Facebook and Instagram. So maybe I'll start with you, Ross, in particular. So Ben's saying, the demographics and the tools are like kind of different, but it's also kind of a uniform platform. Can you unpack that a little bit more about how to use those two?
Yeah, so one of the biggest challenges that a lot of organizations have when it comes to Instagram is there's no easy way to share links. There's no easy way to share content that you've already created unless you reformat it and make it a native asset for Instagram. So you're looking at how can we share things to our story and then convince people to swipe up, which will then take them off of our site. It's very different in that sense because people aren't using Instagram to share links, right? Like I don't go on Instagram to share content about a nonprofit unless I'm with them, I'm experiencing them. It's a very experiential channel that people use to showcase their life versus Facebook where people use it to share news, information, valuable assets, etc. So you, again, to Tim's point about actually doing research and experimenting. Experiment with both. I think that both have a great role in the marketing mix because their user base doesn't lie. But you have to understand the difference in the channels, but also in the way that your users and your potential donors would use those channels as well.
So kind of on a similar-ish note, I'll go to you, Tim, on this one. A lot of the discussion that we've had and even on stage is really kind of more on the acquisition end. How do we use content to reach, to acquire? But how can we use content to actually engage at different parts of the donor life cycle already or nurture them?
Yeah, no, that's great. So one of the things that we found is that the same content that we create for acquisition can also be served to our existing donors as a way of giving them more value for being part of your organization. So if I'm going to go create like a new ebook or a new online course, and maybe I'm going to use that for acquisition to try and acquire new names and turn those into new donors, I can also take those same pieces of content and just send it to my donors and say, hey, we just developed this new thing. Before I release it into the wild, I just wanted to say here because we love you so much, right? And there's no call to action tied to that, but what that's doing is that's building a relationship with your donor. It's helping them understand that they're valued, but it's also connecting them deeper to your organization because if you're creating content that's aligned with your mission, with your organization, with your cause, now that person is becoming more attached to that.
And that's actually a really good point too. So when we talk about content creation or email acquisition, you can't have an offer that's so disconnected from your cause. Like, hey, here's 3 tips to watch a great movie, and then your cause is about international development. Like, people might download that, but what benefit are you actually delivering? So if we have content that's focused on cause and mission, we can serve it. It's actually one of the things we looked for in this new research study, and I'll share a little bit later, is what types of cultivation content were people sending, and about 5% or so had an offer or a download once you were actually a subscriber. The most commonly sent thing was a newsletter. Everybody just kind of sends a newsletter or maybe points at a blog post, but in terms of value add offers, there's actually very few organizations, based on what we saw, delivering an offer, a download, an ebook, some kind of content to nurture. So I think that's a huge opportunity within the life cycle. Do you see the same kind of thing in the work that you're doing? Is not 100%. Just acquisition, but
it's all about, I think you were mentioning it, it's the difference between people don't go online to give, they go online to get. And if you can give them assets that are valuable, you're in their good books, right? They don't want you to always be asking and asking and asking. But if you can add value, they start to view you as somebody that they kind of trust, that they have a relationship with, they have a rapport with. And this is true across just general humans, right? Like this is a human thing. It's not just for nonprofits. It's for B2B. It's for SaaS. It's with dentistry. It's with any industry. People want to be treated like people. And if you give people value, people give you value back. And in our world, it's going to be donations. So that's a win.
Right. And I think, I don't mean to tip your hand on the cultivation study, but we've got some experiments where we have tested just doing that approach, sending content to our donors, and then just monitoring their behavior in their different direct response channels downstream. What we find is when we produce content that's meaningful, that just gives them additional value, then they reward us by giving more gifts. And it's proven. So
and a lot of the welcome series that we're doing for clients, we're moving actually away a lot of times from an ask. It's turned solely into cultivation content, and here's a download offer. But after you download this offer, then it actually moves to more of like what we call an instant donation ask, of saying, thank you so much for downloading. I hope you really enjoy it. Like, if you found this useful or you'd like other people to experience this, we can only do this with the support of people like you. And again, it's bridging that gap of saying they've experienced value. And so we're seeing some success in welcome series of just eliminating asks and actually increasing engagement and fundraising.
Well, and even kind of flipping the welcome series on their head. I know that we've been running some longitudinal experiments where we're testing, oftentimes when you send a series of like onboarding email messages, the temptation is to make it all about you. Hey, like us on Facebook now. Hey, get this thing. Hey, connect to us that way. Hey, do you want this newsletter? And it's just all about the organization. We said, well, how would that feel if you and I just met for the first time, and we exchange cards, and I just start pummeling you with stuff about me?
Right.
You'd be like, dude,
chill.
Later.
Chill.
Yeah, right. And so what we've been testing is saying, look, if we want people to be interested in us, maybe we should start by taking interest in them.
Love it.
And we start asking questions and
huge.
actually having more like open response type of things. Now that creates a whole series of new problems, right?
Right, yeah.
Because if we have a large volume of new names that are coming onto our file, that means that we need to be able to be prepared to handle those responses.
Yeah.
But what we're finding is when you do that kind of stuff, I mean, it's hard. The reason why nobody does it is because it's hard.
Yeah.
But if you can solve that, then you have the advantage.
Yeah, so we have a question here kind of about user-generated content. And just to Tim's point, we actually looked at how many people were asking us for survey or feedback as part of the first emails we received in 45 days. There's about 1.5% to 4% were asking for our feedback.
Wow.
So everyone's just talking at you.
Right.
And very few organizations are saying, what do you care about?
Right.
What kind of content do you want? Very, very few, it was one of the key findings of the whole study was like, wow, so few organizations are in that critical time trying to listen to us. So the question is actually, how do you get people to maybe share their story or use more like user-generated content, or particularly in this case, they're asking like donors, right? So how can you kind of facilitate that so maybe you're not always just creating, but you're kind of curating or something like that? Any tips or suggestions?
So there was a study that I read that talked about how the reason why people create content and support charities when they're creating that content isn't necessarily because they want to be famous or because they want a bunch of likes. It's because they want recognition from the brand that they've done so. So one of the best things that an organization can do is to take that user-generated content, reshare it, tag the person who originally created it, and make them feel good. Make them feel like they're an ambassador for your brand. Make them feel like they're helping your brand. And in doing so, they're going to donate because they feel more connected to you.
Yeah.
So one of the easiest ways to do that is you look at a hashtag that's relevant to your brand. You look at content where your nonprofit, your charity has been tagged, your cause has been tagged. Reshare those posts on your story. It takes 5 seconds to do, but it will mean the world to somebody who actually created that content.
And there's probably more user-generated content specific to your nonprofit than they even know. So like, what are some ways they can like listen or discover that easier?
So on Instagram, it's amazing. They allow you to follow hashtags now. So I would just go through typing in hashtags that are relevant to your space, follow all of them so you can see that content as it's populated and it's showing up in your stream. There's a handful of social media listening tools that you can use as well. I would recommend you consider those if you have the budget for them. But also, I would go back to what we talked about earlier around just talking to your donors.
Yeah.
Right? Like talk to them and ask them, where do you guys share content when you're at events? Where do you go when you're supporting us, when you're volunteering, etc.? Go and find that information and then use that as inspiration for how you can distribute it.
Yeah, I know, Tim, that was a big part of your talk last year was like, how do we listen to donors, right? So can you talk more about how we can be listening, not just asking and talking, but like there's other ways for us to listen?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key is to kind of just take your metrics and flip them upside down, right? So if you have a 20% open rate, that's an 80% non-open rate. So what can you learn from the people that are not opening an email? What can you learn from the people that are not responding to this specific appeal, right? So I think it's just about like actually paying attention to the negative metrics, which oftentimes are kind of cast away because we love to celebrate the victories and like the big green arrows. But oftentimes it's those people that are saying no to us that are teaching us more about what works and what doesn't.
One of the interesting things that we found in the study, like we didn't actually capture, but then we looked through like thousands of emails. And one organization, when we didn't open an email in 30 days, sent us an email and just said, hey, we've noticed you haven't engaged with anything. Like, what are we missing? Or like, take this quick survey and let us know what you want. And it was the only one that we could actually see that happened that quick. And they were very explicit about it and just saying, like, we're listening to you. And a big part of asking for feedback, it's like actually customers are more loyal when you just listen to them. Even if you don't do anything with what you hear, they're more likely. And so I thought that was a combination of like listening, but also even like email hygiene practice.
Well, I think it just goes to like reciprocity, right? Like, you know, if we give people things, they give us things that we want. If we listen to them, then they'll listen to us, right? So, but like the problem is we just get so kind of focused on what we want, what our goal is, that we lose sight of the human being that's on the other side of the screen, right?
Yeah.
That's just like us, by the way, right?
Totally.
And wants, probably similar kinds of things.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's sometimes just getting back to humanizing marketing.
Yeah. Yeah, and do you see that oftentimes too when people are like maybe smaller, they produce very personal, very relevant content, but maybe as they grow, now they feel this temptation to like, well, now we have a large audience, we have to be, and does that kind of actually hurt them in the long run?
It's funny, one of our mantras at Foundation, my company, is do things that don't scale, because it surprises people. So if somebody writes you an email, don't be afraid to open up your webcam, talk into the camera, and then respond to them with a video rather than just text. Because by going a little bit above and beyond what they expect, you can surprise them, and then you are able to win their heart. So you have to embrace that idea once in a while. Just do things that don't make any sense, that you can't do all the time. But by doing it once or twice, you get somebody's heart, you connect with them, they'll never forget you, and it blows their mind.
Yeah. Well, and even like the lean startup movement or nail it and then scale it, the whole concept is if you try to scale something until you actually understand it, you're going to be so far off the mark, right? So a lot of times our marketing, we're planning on how do we connect with 10,000 people instead of like how do we really connect with one? And if we can understand that, then we can find ways to scale. But it's hard to go the other way, right?
It's true.
If you start from this standpoint, now how do you run it back? That's really, really difficult.
Tough.
Yeah. So what are some other ways that maybe, thinking of fundraising in particular, and maybe less around content and maybe more about like even the ask side of things, which we haven't talked a lot about. What are some ways or some tests maybe that people can kind of run so they can kind of learn or understand before then they like unleash that same ask to all their donors? Like what are some tactics maybe?
Well, I mean, real simple is copy is very underutilized online, right? So I mean, like copy is like the backbone of direct mail, which is how most nonprofits have like built their donor bases. But when it comes online, we like forget everything that we learned, and we use very sparse copy. We use lots of images, and we expect people to do the things we want. But when we go and analyze actually donation pages, 70-80% of people that come and click on a donate button, get to the donation page, actually never complete the donation.
Yeah.
So one simple thing you can do is use copy and test two different ways of communicating what the value is to the donor, what the value and impact they're going to create through their gift and giving to your organization.
Yeah.
And then you can understand which of those two different messages creates greater impact. And that teaches you something, right? So like every single experiment, that's why I love testing so much, because it's not just about green arrows, it's about actually accumulating knowledge and wisdom of who your donor is, what they care about, and why they give, right? And so like that's the cool thing is like we can actually mine that stuff and use it to continue to evolve our understanding.
Yeah. On the bus on the way back from the Denver Zoo last night, I was talking to someone from American Cancer Society who runs their optimization, and she said, we either win or we learn. Like that's how they view testing. I thought that's such a great approach.
So you win,
right?
It's a win-win.
It's win-win, exactly. You either win or you actually learn something, which is great.
I mean, I think about like some of our tests where like we're so sure something's going to work, and it like just totally bombs, and like those are the things that are like basically like the mind revolution we needed to have the next breakthrough, right? It's not like the things where, oh yeah, I proved that I'm right, that's great. It's when you test something and you totally get it wrong, you're like, oh, I was going exactly in the opposite direction.
Like the greatest thing about being a marketer in today's age is it's never really deadly to experiment, right? Like the cost is relatively low in comparison to the days when you had to put up experimental billboards and run experimental Super Bowl campaigns. Like we're talking about pixels. Like you can change pixels for nothing. So it makes no sense not to try to create a culture within all of your organizations where experimentation is embraced and leveraged on a regular basis.
Yeah, well, especially if you have large following or sample size, you can actually experiment with a smaller group, understand which wins or doesn't, and then release it to the wider group too. So it's
I want to
cool.
jump on something you said because it's actually very interesting. You mentioned culture, like creating a culture inside your organization that values testing and experimentation and ongoing learning, right? And that, I think, is probably one of the most, I guess, celebrated benefits of doing tests and then socializing them inside your organization. So that's one thing that we really try to do often is go and take, okay, we ran an experiment. Let's break down and determine what did we learn from this experiment, and let's go and share that across the organization. It does a couple things. Number one, something that works online in terms of like a certain message can work offline, right? So there's kind of this opportunity to transcend the channel with the learnings, but also what happens is like people change their kind of internal conversations from like, man, how are we going to get this done? How are we going to do this? To like, hey, what if we tried this?
Yeah.
What if we tried that? And it becomes a lot more exciting place to work in the process. So like the culture changing aspect of this thing, Pasquale, he's running around here somewhere, but like I met him in Madrid and he's with Greenpeace and he runs like the digital kind of transformation optimization across all of the different units. And he talks about like how the main thing he does every single day is try to change culture. That's the hardest thing too.
And it's interesting because there's two elements of that. One, we have to change culture internally, and when you're talking about causes, we're also trying to change culture as a global scale.
Right.
So it's kind of a cool thing where it's like if you can understand that the content that we create, the experiments we run, everything has the opportunity to shape culture, then every day you should get excited to do what we do.
Yeah. Well, I think they're ringing the bell to bring us back in, and that's a great place to end. So, Tim, thanks for your talk. Ross, and thanks for joining us here in the live stream lounge.
Thanks for having us.
So, for the rest of the day, we're going to have more people join. So, please engage on the chat. This is a pretty cool opportunity to ask some pretty brilliant people some questions. We'll make sure that we get to them. So, thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back with some more sessions.